The judge held the file with both hands. It was a thick manila envelope with the court seal completely unbroken. He read the label, then looked at my sister and then at my parents sitting shoulder to shoulder behind their slick attorney. Then he looked at me. His voice was incredibly careful when he spoke. Do they have any idea what is in here? I met his eyes and nodded slowly, just once. What happened over the next 11 minutes was a blur. The bailiff moved twice. My sister screamed loud enough to make the court clerk flinch. My mother gripped the armrest until her knuckles turned ivory. And my father just stared at the floor the exact same way he had been staring at it for 10 years. But that courtroom was just the final chapter. The first chapter started on a Tuesday night in March with a porch light and a baby I never expected. I was 24 years old and fresh off a 12-hour shift at the community health clinic. The kind of shift where you eat standing up and your scrubs smell like hand sanitizer and someone else's grief. I pulled into my driveway at 11:15. The porch light was on. I always left it on since I moved into that tiny rental house. The light was the first thing I noticed and the carrier was the second. It sat square in the center of my welcome mat. An infant car seat with pale yellow padding and a lavender blanket tucked tight around something small and breathing. I dropped my bag and sank to my knees. The baby was asleep and maybe 2 weeks old. Her tiny fists were curled near her chin and her skin was still blotchy and new. A nurse knows how to check vitals without thinking about it. I pressed 2 fingers to her chest to check for a rhythm and counted her respirations. She was steady and warm and looked like she had been fed recently. Then I saw the note folded once and tucked into the side of the carrier. It was torn notebook paper, and I recognized the handwriting before I read the words. It was the same loopy cursive Amanda used on birthday cards she never mailed on time. The note said, "Her name is Lily and I cannot do this, so do not look for me. Signed A." That was it. No explanation and no apology and no phone number. Just a name and an instruction. I looked up and down the street, but it was quiet. Porch, lights were on in a few houses, but there was no movement, and Amanda's car was gone. I did not know when she had been there because it could have been 10 minutes or 2 hours. I scooped Lily out of the carrier and held her against my chest. She stirred, but did not wake. I called 911 with my free hand, and then I called my parents. My mother's phone went to voicemail at 3 a.m. I called twice more, but got nothing. My father picked up on the 4th try with a voice thick with sleep. I told him everything about the carrier and the note and the baby. He was quiet for a long time and then said he would talk to my mother and hung up. By sunrise, I had fed Lily formula from a can I bought at the 24-hour supermarket. I was still in my scrubs with a newborn in a carrier on the checkout belt, while the cashier gave me a look. I pretended not to see. I drove to my parents' house at 8 a.m. with Lily asleep in the back. Their brick house looked the same with the flowers my mother planted years ago. I carried Lily to the front door and knocked. My father opened it and stood aside like he wanted to let me in, but my mother appeared behind him with her arms crossed and her expression set. She did not step forward and did not look at Lily. She said my sister made her choice and that they had warned her about Thomas, but she did not listen. And I told her this was a baby who needed help, but she interrupted me and said the child was my burden now. She said Amanda made her mess and they were not cleaning it up. I looked at my father, who had one hand on the door frame with white knuckles. His mouth opened and closed, but he did not say a word before my mother shut the door. I stood on that porch holding Lily for a full minute before I turned around. Back in the car while Lily slept, I sat behind the wheel with the engine off and made two decisions. I would call Child Protective Services and I would ask them to place Lily with me. The social worker came the next afternoon with practical shoes and a clipboard thick with forms. She walked through my small but clean apartment and checked the smoke detectors and the locks and the water temperature. She asked where the baby would sleep, and I showed her the empty second bedroom and told her I could have a crib by tomorrow from a coworker. She made a note and asked if I was employed full-time. I told her I was a registered nurse. She made another note and asked if I had any idea where the mother went. I told her I had none and that her phone was disconnected. The social worker explained kinship placement and said Lily could stay with me while they investigated. If Amanda did not surface, we would move toward formal guardianship. I signed the temporary placement papers that evening with Lily in a borrowed bassinet beside the kitchen table. That first week was triage. I called my supervisor and asked to switch from night shifts to days, and she agreed immediately. I cut everything I could from my budget, like my gym membership and eating out and streaming services. Formula and diapers became line items in a spreadsheet. 5 a.m. became my anchor with coffee brewing in the dark and Lily in the crook of my arm. I learned to do everything one-handed. Raising Lily was like triage, where you stop the bleeding first and ask questions later. Lily smiled at 6 weeks and rolled over at 4 months and said something close to mama at 9 months. By her first birthday, I had a rhythm. Morning shift at the clinic and Lily at the church daycare and pickup at 4. My supervisor brought bags of clothes and the nurses threw a baby shower in the break room that made me cry in the bathroom. I sent my parents a photo of Lily every month through email. I wrote the same thing each time, saying she was healthy and growing and they were welcome to visit. My mother never responded. My father replied exactly once in month 7, saying she looks healthy. There was no follow-up and no visit and no phone call. I saved every email in a folder. I tried to find Amanda by calling her old number, but it was disconnected. I searched online and asked mutual friends and checked with the police. They filed a missing person report, but she was an adult who left voluntarily with no sign of foul play, so there was nothing they could do. By month 12, I filed for temporary legal guardianship. A family law attorney took my case at a reduced rate and told me to document everything, because you never know when the people who were not there will try to rewrite the story. The hearing was in a small courtroom with wood paneling. My lawyer stood beside me while Lily chewed on a teething ring. Amanda had been served by publication in the newspaper, but she did not respond or appear. My parents were notified, and my mother sent a letter stating they did not oppose guardianship but requested no further contact regarding the matter. The lawyer read it aloud, and the judge signed the order granting me temporary legal guardianship. I carried Lily out of the courthouse into the March sunlight. I sat in the parking lot and let myself feel the weight of being responsible for this child with a judge's signature behind it. Years 2 and 3 were defined by what did not happen. I kept sending monthly emails about her milestones. I sent 96 emails over 8 years. My mother never replied, and my father sent 1 blank holiday card. Amanda surfaced once in year 2. When she called at night, she talked fast and asked me to wire her $300 for rent. When I asked if she wanted to know about her daughter, she went quiet and hung up. She called again the next year asking for $500. I asked her directly if she wanted to see her child, who was now walking and talking. Her voice sharpened, and she said I owed her because I had her kid. I told her the child was not leverage, and she hung up again. I recorded both calls legally and logged them in a spreadsheet. By year 3, my lawyer filed a petition for involuntary termination of parental rights based on willful abandonment. 6 consecutive months without meaningful contact or support was the law, and Amanda had provided none for 3 years. She was served by publication again and remained silent. The judge reviewed the records and terminated her rights immediately. Adoption proceedings followed, and a judge signed the final decree, making me the legal adoptive mother. Lily was 7 and reading chapter books at a 5th grade level when Thomas Garrett found us. He was a contractor who sent a handwritten letter explaining he dated Amanda briefly 8 years ago. She never told him she was pregnant, and he never knew Lily existed until a mutual acquaintance saw a photo of her. He noticed the resemblance and asked to talk without making any demands. My lawyer said he had no legal standing, but I chose to meet him. We met at a diner, and he brought a photo of himself at Lily's age, showing the obvious resemblance. We agreed to a DNA test, which confirmed he was her biological father. He did not celebrate, but simply said he had missed everything and wanted to do right by her. We set ground rules for supervised visits once a month, and he agreed to every condition. Thomas showed up every first Saturday, bringing books about building things. He was respectful and never overstepped. Over that year, his business grew, and he set up an education trust fund for Lily, starting with $80,000, and named her the beneficiary of his life insurance. He named me the sole trustee and filed a notarized affidavit stating Amanda had abandoned Lily and that under no circumstances should the trust be transferred to anyone else. 6 months later, Thomas suffered a massive heart attack on a job site and passed away at 35. Lily cried quietly when I told her. The probate took a year to settle, and the total value of the trust and life insurance came to $278,400. I was confirmed as the sole trustee. His obituary ran in the local paper, mentioning he was survived by a daughter named Lily. Amanda searched the public court filings online and found the trust summary. She called my mother that same week to tell her about the money. They met at my parents' house and built a twisted plan to file for custody so they could petition to change the trustee and gain access to the funds. Amanda showed up on my porch on a Saturday. She wore pearl earrings and a practiced smile, saying she wanted to be part of Lily's life because they were real family. I reminded her she had been gone for 10 years and never called on a birthday. She said our parents wanted to see Lily too. I told her I would think about it and closed the door. My lawyer told me Amanda was just building a case. My mother called next using a warm voice for the first time in 8 years, saying they missed their granddaughter. I offered a supervised visit and she got defensive, saying they were grandparents. I reminded her of her letter requesting no contact. Amanda texted photos of toys she bought, and my father called reading awkwardly from a script about sitting down as a family. I documented every text and call and responded politely in writing, just as my lawyer instructed. 3 weeks later, a process server handed me a petition for custody modification filed by Amanda and my parents. They alleged I had alienated the child from her biological family and denied them access. I looked at the lavender blanket on Lily's bed and called my lawyer. She had already compiled our response, showing the 22 days between Amanda discovering the money and filing the lawsuit. During the deposition, their aggressive lawyer tried to make me look like I kept the family away. I offered him copies of the 96 emails, but he moved on. He asked if I thought the biological family deserved oversight of a trust worth nearly $300,000. I told him the trust was established by the biological father, who specifically chose me as trustee. My mother started a smear campaign at her church, telling everyone I kept the child from them. But an older woman who used to babysit Lily confronted my mother publicly and told her she understood the reality of an empty chair. Lily found out about the lawsuit from a boy at school. She came home quiet and climbed into my bed that night asking if they were going to take her away. I told her nobody was taking her anywhere because the law in my heart said she was my daughter. My lawyer filed motions to let the judge review the sealed adoption records and Thomas's notarized affidavit. The opposing lawyer objected, but the judge granted both. The hearing was set for October. On the day of the court hearing, I wore a navy blazer and sat beside my lawyer. Amanda and my parents took the stand and cried rehearsed tears about how much they loved Lily and how I had stolen her from them. My lawyer did not cross-examine them. Instead, she asked the judge to review the sealed file. The judge read the mother's rejection letter and the abandonment report and the adoption decree. Then he read Thomas's affidavit, tracing the underlined words with his finger. He looked at Amanda and my parents and asked if they knew what was in the file. I calmly told him they were present for every event documented in that file and chose not to act. My lawyer walked the court through the 96 ignored emails and played the audio recording of Amanda demanding money and shouting that I owed her. Then she showed the timeline, proving they filed the petition exactly 22 days after finding out about the money. She stated clearly that this case was not about a child, but about a trust fund. The judge did not even leave the bench. He announced that Amanda's rights were terminated years ago due to willful abandonment, and she had no legal standing. He dismissed the petition with prejudice. He denied the grandparents' visitation request, stating they voluntarily disengaged from the child's life, and noted the highly suspicious timing of their filing. Amanda stood up screaming that I stole her child and her money. The bailiff escorted her out of the courtroom while my mother and father followed in disgrace. My lawyer touched my arm and said it was done. I picked up Lily after school and told her nobody was taking her anywhere ever. We went home and the porch light was still on, just as it had been every night for 10 years. We made spaghetti and had a normal evening. My mother called a week later to blame me for turning the family into strangers. I told her they were strangers the night they closed their door on me, and I did not call back. My father sent a short apology letter that I filed away in the binder without replying. That night, I stood on the porch looking at the light. And 10 years ago, I picked up an abandoned baby in a lavender blanket. Family is not a word you inherit. It is a promise you keep one morning at a time and one porch light left on at a time. Nobody who walked away from that promise gets to redefine it in a courtroom.